Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Stan.
Hello and greetings.
And as part of our 800 sub celebration, we're holding our Shadow Kingdom podcast, as this one won that poll by a mile.
Indeed.
So here we go. We have to redo one of our first Kull videos, except longer form as a book club podcast. It helps that this is actually a really good story.
Indeed. I really enjoyed it.
Now, in our first video on this story, we really skimmed through almost everything in, I think, like 7 or 8 minutes, which is way too short for this story, really. One of the first things that's mentioned is that there's the Golden Tower of Splendor, which I guess it's a pretty splendid place. I imagine it must be one of the main towers to the Great Palace of the Kings of Volusia.
Must be pretty grand.
When the story first starts, we're starting pretty much with a triumphal parade in the mold of Rome's triumphing armies. Of course, you have near the middle of this army the Red Slayers, which are basically the Praetorian Guards of Volusia, except where the Praetorians eventually became one of the least talented military cohorts or legions of the Roman Empire. The Red Slayers seem to have remained a fairly competent force, the predecessors of the Black Dragons of Conan's Aquilonian days. After the Red Slayers comes the barbarians of Mu and Kau, them coming from the hills to the east and the Isles of the West, respectively. Then you've got the Archers of Lemuria, and all are basically to bow before Kull. Now, we have a reference to the Topaz Throne, which anyone who's seen the movie of Kull the Conqueror is familiar with this beautiful throne.
And if you haven't, watch it.
It's great. It's a really good movie. And the Topaz Throne is basically what everybody in the movie is fighting over. Even the demonic version of Akivasha basically wants this throne. So Volusia is obviously a very, very, very powerful empire that everybody wants for themselves. We have Kull, who meets with these parading soldiers and warriors, weirdly not sitting on his throne, but on horseback, all but defying them, and studying each member of the military parade with a keen eye that verges on severity. We have a lot of the Volusians who, at the civilian level, or peasant level I should say, and merchant level, seem to be filled with awe and admiration for Kull, as he's a muscular ox or lion of a man. He's often associated with a tiger. It's essentially his totem spirit. He is essentially the tiger of Atlantis, and the Volusians obviously admire him for his regality and strength, so that one of them actually calls out to Volca, saying, like, look, there's our king. Bye, Volca. So, yeah, Volca is obviously an important god to the Atlanteans, the Pictish, and the Volusians, as revealed in this story. And Volca is the god of the land and the seas. Where Crom is a mountain god and a storm god, Volca seems to be a god of storms to an extent, insofar only as the sea is concerned and the land itself. So he seems to be equal parts fertility and sea god, whereas Crom seemed more like a storm war god of sorts.
So we see that they value a deity that would help them with crops and agriculture and fishing.
Yeah, and obviously also the navy. Obviously very different values to the Sumerians. Volca is also called upon by the Picts, which it seems strange that all three lands worship the same god. It is a very peculiar quality. So that in the movie, I guess the Flame of Volca would probably give Volusia, in the movie, a lot of cultural sway over her two major rivals. And maybe one could read into it that this is why the Atlanteans are jealous of the Volusians and resent them, because they control the religion. He who controls the gods controls men's souls and minds. You control what they believe, you control. But it seems that the Atlanteans resent this religious supremacy because they want it. They're squabbling over who's the main representative of Volca, I think, to an extent. This parade is not the only thing that concerns the story of this first chapter of the Shadow Kingdom. Kanu, the ambassador of the Picts, requests a late night meeting alone with Kull, whom is not entirely impressed. Well, Kull's the one who suggests that they meet at night, referencing the hills of Zolgara that are to be found outside of Volusia. Basically sneers at and mocks and humiliates Brull, just resting on your laurels. That said, the main hall in this story is called the Hall of Society. We also get an interesting reference that Tolkien fans may well appreciate. The Picts are called the Men of the West, which in Tolkienian lore is associated with the Númenóreans.
So we can make an argument that Brull is Númenórean.
Volusia is sometimes also called the Land of Dreams, which this is a reference to the Jungian Campbellian ideas of the universal unconscious, basically the land of dreams. So that Volusia belongs to a period when it is Neverland. It is a place that doesn't really exist. A reference to how this is just a bunch of fairy stories. The thing about dreams is that they could turn into nightmares just as easily as they could become perfect. So Howard here is painting two different pictures, so to speak. A nightmarish one and also a magnificently beautiful one. It is the land of archetypes and nightmares and whatnot. The thing to bear in mind is that Howard was reading a lot of those kind of psychological theories and was thinking on this stuff to an extent all on his own. He arrived at similar conclusions as Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell without having read a lot of their works because he died before a lot of them were developed. But he instinctively knew from reading about human psychology and Freud's theories everything he needed to know to figure out archetypes and a lot of the universal unconscious ideas and whatnot, which just shows how brilliant he was.
Indeed.
As for Volusia, it's also called the greatest of the 7 empires.
Which does show that Volusia is in a golden age.
To an extent, I think it was supposed to be in decline when Kull showed up, but then he's been revitalizing it. He's very much something of a... Kull's a bit of an Augustus or Caesar figure.
And Kull seems to lack confidence in himself. Then he tries to psych himself back up by throwing his mane back and saying, I am Kull.
It's described as him throwing his mane back like a lion might. I did notice that as well. It was interesting to find out that he kind of lacks a bit of self-confidence or belief in himself or something.
Sometimes maybe even the strongest of men have some doubt.
Inside themselves, yeah. Anyways, I think we've just about covered everything.
Yes.
And next time we're going to cover, hopefully, when it comes to this podcast, we'll cover the second chapter of The Shadow Kingdom. So if you want to stay tuned for that video, don't forget to smash the like and subscribe button as though you were Kull having just finished smashing his enemies to itty-bitty pieces.